So part of what makes many conversations feel difficult is the very strong emotions they bring up in the parties. And perhaps most prominent among these emotions is anxiety.
I'm anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions, and we are just super jazzed to be here. Where can I put my stuff?
As those of you who've seen Inside Out 2, anxiety is one of the main characters. And today, I'm going to discuss 5 key strategies to handle anxiety in advance of and then during a difficult conversation. And if you stick to the end, I'm going to share with you a bonus tip from one of my dear mentors who always offers sage and wise advice. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, where I led the Negotiation and Mediation clinical program and taught negotiation for more than 20 years. In the comments, share with me a story of how anxiety may affect your ability to handle difficult conversations in your own life. I'd love to be able to respond to them and learn from you. Okay, so let's start with tip number 1, which I call name it to tame it. So whenever you are preparing for or even in the midst of a difficult conversation, simply allowing yourself to become aware of the anxiety and actually name it to yourself, not necessarily out loud, but just in your head, can be extremely helpful in terms of handling it. So what does that mean? It means not trying to suppress the feeling, not trying to cabin it, not trying to judge it.
Don't hold back.
Anxiety is helpful and informative. The problem is when we let it get out of control. This can involve some breathing through it, some just kind of holding it and looking at it. So Matt Lieberman, who is at UCLA, has done some really amazing research, and he's shown that something called affective labeling, that is naming the emotion you're feeling, actually helps get it under control instead of out of control and put it in perspective. This leads to the second important tip, because anxiety can help us in planning, but the problem with it is that anxiety can also lead to catastrophize. And so the tip here is avoid catastrophizing, avoid going to the worst possible outcome.
Stop overthinking it.
So specifically, when you are thinking about a difficult conversation, in your preparation, you want to think about a range of possible outcomes and pathways for that conversation. But what I have found in working with clients, and frankly, in my own experience sometimes, is that we have this tendency to say, oh my gosh, there's this terrible thing that I have to talk about. Is it going to help? No, it's not going to help. It'll actually make the situation worse. The relationship will be ruined. I'll be hurt. They'll be hurt. I'll be exhausted. Fill in the blank. I won't do this conversation. What I want you to think about is that a real possibility? Yeah, probably is. What are the other possibilities? Because in fact, usually there are many, many others. So one of the ways that I handle this is I have a very dear friend who actually is an eternal optimist. She's probably the opposite of me. If there are 300 possible outcomes, she almost always thinks it's going to end up with like the best possible outcome. My tendency is to assume it's going to be the worst possible outcome. But this colleague is incredibly helpful to me when I'm preparing. Not because she gets me to say, oh, it's actually going to be amazing, but she helps me realize that I'm over-focused on the ways this can go badly instead of all the other possible ways. Third piece of advice is to really do some preparation and specifically identifying what are the things you can control about this difficult conversation and what are the things that you can't control about this difficult conversation. So specifically, the thing you really can't control is what the other person will say or do. But the thing you have some ability to handle is how you show up in the conversation. And here's the beautiful thing, and if you're watching this channel, I trust you believe this, because this is a channel about negotiation. Your behaviors can actually influence what they do, right? Because negotiation, difficult conversations, it's all about influence. So the thing you have some control over is how you show up. Will you listen well? How authentic will you be? Will you make yourself vulnerable? How will you deal with a nasty comment? How will you deal with something that's hurtful? The way you think this through is have responses for all of the hard things that they might say. Lean into active listening. Lean into understanding the full range of emotions that might or will come up for you.
Listen.
As part of this preparation, it can be really helpful to work with a coach or a trusted advisor, someone that you could actually mood it with so that you have a sense of what your own reactions might be, so you can think about the range of behavioral responses. Fourth piece of advice, and this is really when you begin the conversation itself, and it's simply considering the possibility of naming your own anxiety at the beginning, and then asking, is it okay to be raggedy in this conversation? So let me develop this a bit more. There is a real power to beginning a difficult conversation, saying something like, I have something that is really important to talk about, and I am hoping you will engage this with me. And also, I want to share I'm feeling somewhat anxious and worried about it. The putting it out there has this way of just neutralizing it. And to the degree the other person might want to throw it in your face, it's harder for them to do that. The putting out of the emotion itself, you're not saying, you're making me anxious. You're just saying, this is something that's in the room right now. If you combine that with this request to be raggedy, I think it's a really inviting and hard to say no invitation to the other side. So what do I mean by being raggedy? This is a phrase that I learned through my work at Seeds of Peace. Seeds of Peace works with Israeli and Palestinian young adults, helping them dialogue across lines of difference. And because those conversations, so emotionally fraught, so filled with anxiety, they have a ground rule called be raggedy. Be raggedy means that you can say something that might land in not the best way, that might not come out as eloquently as you would prefer, but there is an extended grace from the other side to say, that was upsetting or hurtful. I imagine you didn't intend it. Let me explain why, and ask you to kind of restate or react to that. So asking for permission to be raggedy, naming the anxiety at the start of the conversation, can do a lot to just tame some of those emotions that make us nervous and make us anxious. So let me just say, when you are putting out the fact that you might be feeling anxious or worried, I want to suggest that you just leave the emotion where it is, that you don't say, because of some catastrophic outcome. Just putting the emotion out there is sufficient. So for example, if you are having a difficult conversation with your parent about perhaps telling them that, I don't know, you don't want to get married in a Catholic church and they are deeply Catholic, you might say, raising this issue makes me feel anxious and worried. What you probably wouldn't want to say is, it makes me feel anxious and worried because you're going to throw me out of the house, because you're going to get really mad at me. Because that second because, I think, suddenly requires them to respond and either say, no, I won't, or yes, I will, or get defensive. And for the purposes of sharing and handling the emotion, it's just not helpful. The other danger in adding that last kind of catastrophic element in is that you create in them a sense of dread or worry that they might not even have. And it just doesn't help. It's not necessary. The fifth tip here is really just giving yourself grace. The reality is that difficult conversations are called difficult because they're hard.
Simple.
And all the preparation in the world doesn't mean that the anxiety might get the best of you. So having the courage to kind of own that, to be able to reflect, to be able to make some mistakes, I think empowers you in the conversation and beyond the conversation to do the reflection you need to get better. So let me share with you a bonus story that I think is filled with rich, rich wisdom. And it really comes from somebody who is a seasoned coach and dear friend of mine. And it's an observation that she has made through more than 30 years of work helping people prepare for difficult conversations. And it's this: there's virtually no one who comes out of a difficult conversation saying, that was worse than what I imagined. Almost always, the anxiety and the fear is far worse than the reality of having the conversation. And so the coaching through this, right, is that confidence comes with the courage of having the conversation. If you get over the anxiety, own it, lean in, coming out of that, you are going to have an increased courage, increased confidence, and increased capacity to have future difficult conversations you will need. So, help ease my own anxiety about these videos, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you can get more advice on how to handle difficult emotions in challenging conversations. And stay tuned for this next video. What do I do if the other side is stonewalling? I'm Bob Bordone. See you soon. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.